Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm Phil Kirkbride, and today joined by Dave Prentice and Gav Buckland for a special reason. This is the first of two-part podcast discussing the 1980s, but not the great teams between 84, 87 that we all know and love and have read and written and seen so much about. That will come in time, of course. We will do dedicated podcasts to them. But what I wanted to know was about the teams of the 80s that led to that great team. And then in the second part of the podcast we will do next week on the teams that came after, tried to live up to the expectations, but unfortunately were unable to. So Gav and Preno will talk us through the first part today, which is from 1980. Of course, we will pick up on the 1st of January 1980 all the way to the end of 83. And we'll discuss the highs and lows and the makings, the foundations of what became a legendary Everton team under Howard Kendall. Chaps, so as I mentioned there, January the 1st, 1980, coming to the new decade. Gordon Lee is manager, for the people who are listening who perhaps weren't aware. A 1-0 home win over Nottingham Forest. All's well in the Blues world, is it not?
I probably wouldn't say all's well, no. I mean, I always think that Gordon Lee is unfairly maligned as an Everton manager. Because he did give us two very, very positive, very optimistic seasons. That 77-78 season is a lot of people's favourite seasons, even though Everton won nothing, scored 76 league goals that year, the highest scorers in the top division, even higher than the Nottingham Forest team that actually ended up winning the league that year, and played with a real verve and a real style. The Thomas and Latchford partnership was at its peak. Martin Dobson and Andy King goal scoring midfielders. It was that left side of Thomas, Pedgick, Dobson. It was great to watch. Following season, finished fourth, which nowadays we bite your hand off for. But then was a little bit of a disappointment. But it was still a decent finish. But it all went wrong from there for Gordon Lee. And certainly at the start of the decade, I think you ask how an Evertonian's feeling at the start of the decade, and probably bruised, I think is the best phrase to use. Because we'd had that really bad experience in the FA Cup in 1980, having had that incredible run, got through to a semi-final against a second division team, West Ham United. We were favourites to go through, and someone managed to screw that up. Brian Kidd got himself sent off in the first game. The replay at Elland Road was tragic, and so Gordon Lee's hopes the following season again hinged on the FA Cup. And again, it was a great run. Beat Arsenal. That was the Arsenal team that had been to, I think it was 3 finals in a row. Beat them in the first game, beat Liverpool in a famous FA Cup tie. Southampton were a very, very good side then, beat them too. And, everything's looking great again. Manchester City at home in the quarters, 2-1 up with about 5 minutes to go. And then somehow spectacularly managed to make it all go wrong. Paul Power equalised. We heard a lot about him a couple of years' time. And Kevin Ratcliffe got sent off in the last minute for, I think, headbutting Tommy Hutchison. So, it all went pear-shaped from that point. I couldn't remember this, but I had a little look back on the results on Steve Johnson's excellent website. And we lost 6 of the next 7 games, 5 in a row after that game. One of which was the game where Joe Royle came back as a player for Norwich City and scored his last league goal and was applauded off the pitch. So it was almost like so many hopes and expectations had been built around the FA Cup run. And when it came crashing down about our ears, the players didn't have the character, the strength, the spirit to bounce back from it. And it just fell apart. Gordon Lee was quite deservedly sacked at the end of that season. And of course, so Howard came in the saviour in August 81.
Gav,
you remember it, Gav?
Cheers, Preno.
Is that how the mood was, Gav, from your point of view at the start?
Yeah. I think the last sort of 18 months of Gordon Lee's reign from January 80 through to when he got sacked was all around cups. The team was not good enough to compete in the league. 79-80 we nearly went down. It was a couple of late results kept us up. 80-81 we started reasonably well, if you remember, Preno. Two consecutive games where we won 5-0 against Palace and Coventry.
Palace in the 80s, yeah.
Yeah. By the time we got to the new year, we tanked in the league, and it was all about the FA Cup. My own 2 memories of that are the game against Manchester City, which if you could show a classic English FA Cup tie ever, it would be Everton Manchester City back to 7th place of 81. 100 miles an hour, both ends. Really, really good, exciting game. Full house. City had must have had 12,000 there, mustn't he? And Gordon Lee's reign hinged on Imre Varadi, didn't it? If you remember the 2-1, there was a back pass from Tommy Caton, Varadi at the Gladys Street end, and Varadi got the ball down to Joe Corrigan, and Imre, being Imre, hit the side net, didn't he, at 2-1. If he'd have scored there, it's 3-1, Everton through to the semi-final. But as it happens, as you say, Paul Power, strangely, he scored, didn't he? And then we got beat 3-1 on the replay. And the other one, which is, there's a bit of a strange link in this, the game I was talking about, we got beaten on Easter Saturday 2-0 at home to Norwich when Joe scored, and they said afterwards in that Gordon Lee's position was going to be reviewed as manager, which basically said that they were going to sack him. I can't help thinking that the same thing happened with Marco's, didn't it? When we got beat 2-0 against Norwich this year. Yeah. And if you have a look in 83-84 when we were struggling under Howard, we got beat 2-0 at home by Norwich then in about November 83, and the board kept faith in them. And it's strange, those three managers, their faiths were sort of not decided but hinged on 2-0 home defeats to Norwich, And with Prentice, by the players had gone, haven't they? After the cup defeat by City, I think they knew Gordon was going. There was quite a young team as well, and it was just a matter of time. And I think Gordon, he was a good. Gordon, I was thinking manager, you've got two tasks, haven't you? To get the best out of the players and the raw material you're given, and then building a team in your own style with your own players that you brought in. I think, Gordon couldn't do that, could he? Something like Roberto Martinez couldn't do it either, could he? Lots of managers can't do it. The really good ones can do both. Like Moyes did that, didn't he? And that was good. That was Gordon as a manager. Good couple of years manager, but when he's got to do his own thing, struggled. And I think that's what happened to him. And he was a good manager, but nowhere near good enough to take Everton to success.
No, he was okay. I mean, I always think, I wrote about it again only last week, Bobby Robson, how, he came so close to becoming an Everton manager. I think it was 1977 when Gordon Lee was appointed. I mean, he was approached many times, 4 times, I think, by Everton to become manager. And the second time in 1977, he actually agreed a contract, a phenomenal contract, so a huge sum of money. And he'd asked the Everton board, I just want to be able to tell Patrick Cobbold, my owner back at Ipswich, that I'm going. Please, allow me to do that. And I'll travel up tomorrow and I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be the Everton manager. Anyway, whether it was good journalism, whether there was a leak in the boardroom, I don't know. But one of the nationals splashed the following day, Robson for Everton. And he felt offended. He felt that he'd not been allowed to tell his chairman first, and his chairman had to read about it in the national press. So when he went to see Patrick Cobbold, he said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry to be leaving you, Bobby, or losing you, Bobby." And he said, "Well, I'm not going now." He says, "I can't go to a football club that will do that to me." Now, we could have just been victims of good journalism then. We don't know. Or maybe there was a link, we don't know. But that Bobby Robson created that absolutely beautiful Ipswich team that was so easy on the eye and successful. They won an FA Cup, the UEFA Cup, the runners up in the First Division twice. And you just think, what would he have done at Everton with the resources that Everton had at the time? Not quite as so rich as they had been, but still able to spend significant sums of money. And it's one of those great what might have been stories. Although ironically, so one of Gordon Lee's swan songs was against Bobby Robson's Ipswich, which was right at the beginning of the 1980s. We'd lost Dixie Dean, obviously, on March the 1st, 1980, at a derby match. And my mother-in-law, Barbara, actually took his ashes onto the pitch at Goodison Park and sprinkled them on the pitch. 6 days later, we played Ipswich Town at Goodison. And whether it's fate at work, I don't know. Maybe it's me being a bit overly romantic. But Bob Latchford, the number 9, scored the opening goal that day. Big upset, really. Ipswich were massive favourites. Yeah. Brian Kidd, who had worn the number 9 shirt, scored the second. We ended up winning 2-1. And, so famous FA Cup victory. But in true Gordon Lee tradition, couldn't carry it through. Ended up failing in the semis. So, it was great times. Yeah.
Worth adding to that Ipswich had beaten us at Goodison 4-0 the month before, hadn't
Absolutely battered us, yeah.
And just show you how good Ipswich were at that time. The week before, when the derby game at Goodison, where Dixie died, they beat Manchester United 6-0, hadn't they, at Portman Road, and missed 3 penalties as well. In one of the great pastings of my lifetime, But it was I think it was quite, going back to your original question, I think by January the 1st, 80, Phil, I think Lee, he was on borrowed time even then. He'd done 2.5, he'd done 33 years then, which, as Prentice will tell you, is normally about, when you've done 3 years in Everton manager, normally there or thereabouts getting the bullet. And I think Gordon was getting into that territory. So I think it was a question of when, not if. I think unless they'd have won the FA Cup, which unfortunately he fell short on a couple of occasions.
Yeah. Because of course, so at the end of the 79-80 season, the team finished 19th. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then obviously, which I imagine was just hugely alarming to anybody at the time. But then the end of the second season, which proved Gordon's final season, a run towards the end of 1 win in 13 games in all comps.
It was, like I say, that Manchester City defeat just absolutely crushed everybody around the football club. And it was 100% a question of when, not if. I think there was only one win towards the end of that season against Middlesbrough.
Middlesbrough, yeah.
And that effectively, sort of kept our heads above water. But, there was no way on God's earth that Gordon Lee could continue. And it was no surprise, so when he did make way, it was just then a question of who was going to replace him. And, so obviously Howard was the guy that the board turned to. And, in preparation for this, it's not that I always spend all my time on YouTube, but I actually sat and watched Howard's first game again last night. I was there that day on the street, and I remember, the excitement, Alan Byerly and what a good player Alan Ainscough looked, and how a fella called Mick Walsh actually could be a good player. That was Mick Walsh, the defender, not Mick Walsh, the forward, who was hopeless. But it was good to watch that again. And what struck me was it was an open game. It could have gone either way, but we ended up winning 3-1. But the crowd actually were chanting, "Everton are back, Everton are back." And it was a sense of expectation even then that Everton was still one of the big names in English football and should not be troubling the lower reaches of the Football League. They should be challenging for trophies. And that was what Howard was told. That was his remit when he came. So you're here to win things, basically. Everton was still a club with huge expectation back then.
What was the mood? Can I just ask, what was the mood on the terraces then towards the end of Gordon Lee's reign? Was it, was it as we've experienced it in recent years? Was it toxic or was it just indifferent? Or?
No, it was weird then because football was very different then. It was flat, it was stagnant, it was quiet. I think you're getting gates of like 14 and 15,000, and I remember standing on the street and being able to put your arm out and so not touch somebody. It was, and fans just shoot. It was almost what's worse than toxicity. It's probably just
social distancing.
People just basically losing faith in the entire football club, and it was a very, very flat, stagnant time. And there were occasional boos and jeers and things, but nothing like the level of venom that you've seen in in recent years because the crowds were so low, I suppose.
Yeah, I joked early on this week that if you were at Everton supporter in the early 80s, you got used to 6 feet of self-isolation because you could stand on the ladder seat, couldn't you? And the nearest person would literally be 6 yards away from you. Yeah. I think you are right. There's a certain amount of apathy. The elephant in the room here is, of course, that Liverpool was so successful. Yeah. But I think there was probably even more fatalism then than what there is even now. I always remember there was Boys from the Black stuff, Alan Leesdale's classic study and drama of unemployment in Liverpool in the early 80s. I can't remember what one of the lines they're all talking about how bad things are, and one of them turns out says, could be worse, it could be an Everton fan. And the total despair, that was it. It could be worse, it could be an Everton fan, And there was sort of that dark humour, I think, that was attached to it as well. And then I was right. I mean, we spent, just to show, we were still would start the close association with us in 81. We spent massive amounts of money in the summer of 1981 bringing in the so-called Magnificent Seven. I don't know what you'd add up the fees to, but I would imagine it'd be somewhere around 1.5 million, something like that, which is a big, Howard famously wanted to blow the entire budget on Brian Robson, didn't he? Yeah. But Ron from West Brom, but Ron Atkinson wouldn't sell him. I think Howard thought that Ron knew he was getting the Man United job and thought, as soon as he'd leave West Brom, he'd take Brian Robson with him, which is exactly what happened, of course, didn't it? So, kind of like there was a bit of, Howard, people were old enough to remember him as a player. He'd done well at Blackburn. He promoted from the 3rd division and into the 2nd, nearly got into the top flight the year before. So there was a big mood of optimism. Hope that it was a roasting hot day as well, the classic opening day of the season. And you had all the players in who, in retrospect, when you look at those players now, and I know you want to talk about Steve McMahon particularly, most of them weren't better. Most of them were inferior to the players that we had at the club at the time.
Well, no, if you think about the Magnificent Seven, you're looking at them. Yeah. The only one was magnificent, and that was Neville. And Neville wasn't even playing at the time, so Jim Arnold was his number one goalkeeper. Neville was, a reserve that could be decent halfway down the line. Mick Walsh was okay, the centre-back, so not better than what we had, but he was okay. Alan Ainscough was okay. Mick Ferguson was the one that really excited me to a degree because he had a great goal-scoring record. And was it... Yeah. Nottingham Forest took him from Coventry for about 900 grand, I think it was, which was a lot of money back in the day. I think we got him for a fraction of that. But he had a great goal-scoring record. But this is genuine. This is a centre-forward called Ferguson who was too big for his boots. Yeah. Literally, he had lots and lots of ankle injuries and all kinds of, muscular injuries, so lower down, and it subsequently transpired that because he had something like size 4 feet, which apparently which were too small for his frame. He was a big lad. He's like 6'2", 6'3", and they reckon that all these injuries came about as a result of his having small feet for such a big frame. And so he scored a few goals for us, so early on. He scored one at Anfield, didn't he, in the 3-1 defeat. But you could never get a run of fixtures going. So he was never going to be the answer because he just wasn't fit enough. Mickey Thomas, he only lasted 6 months before he ended up doing what Mickey Thomas does, upsetting the manager and getting sold. It was just 7 absolutely bizarre signings. Alan Byerly, of course, scored in his first 2 games. And then again, so just blew up. There's a story that Howard wasn't happy with his performance at Elland Road in the second game and absolutely slaughtered him on the team coach on the way back. And it was vicious, so really over the top in front of all the other players. And he never actually recovered from that, so just went into his shell and never really recovered. So 7 players that, so just basically never really worked out. Let me talk about them before we talk about McMahon.
I was just going to say, there's a couple of things there that I would say is, Tim Arnold was actually a very good goalkeeper. Shadow, but Tim Arnold was an excellent keeper. It would have been a decent signing if they'd not bought out, or he would have been a guard. And Mickey Thomas, it's well worth looking at this, Phil, from sort of a young, Howard's what? He was 35, Howard, when he took over, wasn't he? So he was a relatively young manager. I mean, he'd probably only be 4 or 5 years older than some of the players, wouldn't he? And Mickey Thomas, the story's well worth telling is that Mickey Thomas, who was a, obviously legend for lots of different reasons, shall we say, refused to play in the reserve games, didn't he? And Howard effectively said, well, if you don't want to play for the reserve game, you don't want to play for Everton, I'm offloading you. And he did. And I think that was Howard at a very early part of his tenure, putting his marker down, wasn't it, to the players that I'm not somebody who you're going to mess with. But Thomas was actually reasonably big. Of the players, he'd nationally be the most well-known, wouldn't he? Yeah. And had the highest profile. And Howard said straight away, right, you're off. Okay, we take a loss, but if you're not, don't want to play for the reserve, don't want to play for Everton, right, get off. And I thought that was strong management there by Howard that I think would not have got unnoticed in the dressing room. Even though Howard, he's very affable and everybody says he's a great boss. I thought that was good management by Howard at the time. Like, you're off.
Yeah, the roof was strict to him, definitely. I've heard him say that many times when he went to Manchester City. I forget which player it was, but one player had basically spoken out of turn, and Howard leapt upon that great opportunity to put my marker down and to show the players exactly what I think. And he did it regularly. When he came back to Everton second time, Mike Milligan. Remember him telling all the press at the time that, so he was going to move Mike Milligan on. And somebody said to him, well, what if he doesn't want to leave? And he just said, don't worry, son. When he's playing for the A team on a Friday night at Morecambe, he'll want to leave. And he did. He could be absolutely ruthless when he wants to leave.
But Howard in 81 was different to 91, though. He was still learning his trade, wasn't he? And I thought that was really, really top management. But we mentioned a few of the players at the time, Phil. We still had even though we had brought loads of players, we still had quite a lot of good young players in and around the squad. Kind of, we were talking about Steve McMahon, weren't we, before we kicked off, as it were, who had then done a season at Everton, hugely promising.
Can I just roll back as well to the 80-81 season, Gordon Lee's last, because in this story that we're trying to tell about the foundations being built for the great Everton team, am I right in saying that it was in that season that Graham Sharp signed and made his debut.
Yeah, he signed, but he was very rarely used, was he? So in and out of the team quite a lot in the very early days. I mean, you certainly wouldn't have had him down as a cornerstone of a great Everton team at the time. He was okay. He was promising. Certainly probably didn't show the promise that maybe Dominic Calvert-Lewin is showing now. He looked like a young striker who was desperately in need of confidence at the time. And to me, the biggest turning point in Graham Sharp's whole career was when Andy Gray signed. And, Andy Gray took him under his wing and basically showed him so many tricks, brought him out of his shell. Great talent, but, maybe lacked the character to actually express it at that time. Again, in the name of research, watching another old game the other night against Luton Town, the 5-0 win, which was that 83, late 82, early 83.
Yeah.
And Sharpie came off the bench that day. David Johnson was actually in the team ahead of him. And, God bless David Johnson. He'd been a very, very good player for Everton in the early 70s and an excellent player for Ipswich and Liverpool. But he was way past his best when he came back to Everton in the early 80s. And for him to be keeping Graham Sharp out of the team underlined what Sharpie wasn't doing at the time. Probably of the players at the club who you could say were cornerstones, Mark Higgins probably, was a cornerstone and would have been, but for injury wreck in his career, so in that 83-84 campaign, he was at the club already. I can't think of many others that would become, cornerstones. There was a big rebuilding job that Howard had to do.
Well, I think they were all in the reserves, weren't they? I mean, I think
Kevin Ratcliffe was there, wasn't he?
Yeah, Kevin Richard. I mean, I think I mentioned this to you before, Phil. Is if he turns up at Everton reserves, say early on in Howard's first season, you'd see a reserve lineup that had Neville Southall in it, Kevin Ratcliffe, Gary Stevens, Graham Sharp, Kevin Richardson were all in Everton reserves, all at the same time. I think John Bailey was still, because John Bailey had been dropped out because he played Mick Walsh at left back. Yeah. So you could see all them players, and this is one of the reasons why we're later on, we're all in Colin Harvey's reserve team, weren't they? And when you see our reserve team results at the start of that season, like, they were all really good. I seen Kevin Richardson score 5 against Blackburn reserves, and Kevin was a midfielder, I mean, you're talking, of all the young players in the club at that time, around 81, the one he thought was going to be the biggest star was Kevin Richardson, strangely enough, which is quite bizarre. And he did become a hugely successful player across 3 or 4 different clubs. But he was the one that he thought was going to be the really big star.
Well, the one to me that stood out like a beacon was Steve McMahon, who, so being a ball boy famously at Everton and broke through into the first team round about that era, 79, 80, round then. And he was everything you want in a central midfielder back then. He was aggressive, spiky, polished, could score goals, scored a cracker against Ipswich, I think it was, in a League Cup tie that we got beaten. But he was proper leadership material. And at that time, he was probably better than the players, that were surrounding him, which is why he ended up wanting to leave the club. But I just wonder what would have happened in Everton's history, so if he'd have stayed around, because he was such a good player and he wanted to move on because he was ambitious, he wanted to win trophies. So he went to the champions, Aston Villa, the European Cup holders, just as they were on the downslide, and it won nothing. That was why he ended up at Liverpool then, and why such enmity, between him and the Everton fans developed. But he was such a good player that I'm thinking, if he'd have stayed at the football club, what would have happened? Would Peter Reid have been signed in 82? So maybe not. And, Reid is a genuine Everton legend and, so a huge part of that great team. If he had have maybe, also signed Peter Reid, what would Peter Reid and Steve McMahon have been like as a central midfield partnership? Arguably magnificent, but football's all about balance. And that means that then Paul Bracewell wouldn't have arrived. And Bracewell and Reid were so beautifully balanced as a partnership. They provided such, aggression, guile. They were absolutely brilliant at pressing as well. They led the press, so from the middle of the park. And would it have worked as well with McMahon alongside Peter Reid? I'm not so sure it would. So I don't know. Maybe all parties benefit from the result.
Yeah, I agree. I think he would have been a bit light. I think defensively, I know McMahon would push up, wouldn't he? But if you got Trevor Stephen pushing up at the same time and Kevin Sheedy, you can make yourself vulnerable. I mean, McMahon was, if you watch, you've alluded to it before, Preno, the FA Cup game against Liverpool in 1981. I could have McMahon, who's 20, up against Liverpool midfield of McDermott and Souness. absolutely top quality players, and he doesn't look out of place at all. He's competing. It sort of like shows you what a great player. I mean, I must say great player, but he'd be a top class player. He became. Yeah. But I think it was right. I remember hearing a story at the time in '83. I think one of the arguments was over money, wasn't it? That he wasn't getting paid enough compared to some of the players that Howard had brought in. And I think there was that sort of rumour, wasn't it, that actually Liverpool wanted to buy him, didn't he, in '83, but we wouldn't sell him to Liverpool. So we ended up selling him to Aston Villa so they could sell him to Liverpool, you know. And because imagine there would have been ructions, wouldn't there, in '83 if they sold McMahon to Liverpool. But he was a great player. But I think maybe in '84, '85 he wouldn't have had the right balance in midfield, as you say. I think.
I'll tell you what, the one that really bemuses me, who was an absolute top-class midfielder at that time and never really worked, Asa Hartford, who was so good for a couple of seasons at Everton. And again, big money signing. I think Nottingham Forest again. Brian Clough bought him for $500,000. Never worked out there. So Everton took him, and he was a great midfielder. We used to have back then the Echo Man of the Match Awards, and it almost became like a standing joke. It was just Hartford week after week after week, and he was an excellent footballer, but never seemed to work out properly at Everton. He was symptomatic of that very, very early '80s era, and I think if he hadn't gone by the time that Howard arrived, he certainly went very soon afterwards.
I think he started that season, didn't he, '81, '82, and he went to.
That's right. He missed the penalty against Birmingham, didn't he?
Yeah. I think City. But what's the famous 1980 documentary about City? Peter Swales was talking to Malcolm Allison, isn't he? And Swales was saying, "Can't we get Asa Hartford back from Everton?"
Yeah.
And he did eventually go back, you know. But I think Asa was one of them. I think some of the senior pros in Gordon's last sort of 12 months, maybe down tools a little bit, only played when he wanted to, you know. Because I think there was an absence of morale in the dressing room. But Asa was top. I mean, maybe reaching the end of his career, but I always felt he was a bit in and out for me. Yeah. But there was a few. I mean, I thought a cracking player I thought Paul Lodge was a really good player. He was a young lad who come in, didn't he? I thought he was really good. But we still had some of the remnants of the Lee era. '81. Billy Wright was still around, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Mark Higgins. But it was. You know what, Phil? I think it's a bit like what I always say to you is that I think we had a lot of young players and a lot of old players, but not a lot in between at the peak of their career, you know.
Yeah, can I throw the original Seamus Coleman in there as well as one of those players that sort of might have made it but didn't quite? John Barton, who was a great story. He was just like Seamus Coleman. He was signed from a non-league Worcester City for about $40,000, I think it was. It was a nominal transfer fee, and everyone thought, well, what have we got here? And he was an archetypal Seamus Coleman. He was a marauding, buccaneering right back, great going forward, not bad defensively, and it was an absolute steal. It was an era when you could do that. Eamon O'Keefe was another one that we bought from non-league, from Mossley, who was decent as well. Yeah. Republic of Ireland international, and Barton was looking like he was going to become a really decent right back, and then horribly broke his leg in a couple of places, and it was so really unfortunate, and was never quite the same player again after that. But you look back on that era with some fondness for some players, but the overall picture was pretty bleak, to be honest.
I was going to say 81-82 Gav finished 8th, 82-83 finished 7th. Can you kind of give us an idea, as best you can, of maybe the feeling, at board level? Was there a sense of confidence from what you could feel on the stands? And
there was a sense that Howard needed time. If you read what the board were up to them at the time, I think they did realise Howard was a promising young manager. He brought in on that basis, and it was going to take time to turn things around because you were a bit of a mess, to be honest with you, in the summer of '81, and I think. 81-82, we, in a strange way, Howard's, what helped Howard is that his signings didn't work in the summer of '81, so he's forced to bring in some of the younger players that are probably a little bit ahead of the time. I mean, Gary Stevens, Kevin Ackford being in and out of the team, Graham Shaw, Kevin Richardson, Alan Irvin, another winger, who obviously coached the club. He made his debut in that season. All came through, I think, maybe a year or two before I did want to do. So we started the season reasonably well. Had a horrible period mid-year and ended up like Howard. We always say this, Benno, don't we? Howard's teams always finish the season well.
Very much so.
And I think we won 5 out of the last 6, 81, 82, and ended up finishing, I'd say, 7th or 8th. Following year was pretty similar. We started reasonably well. We signed Kevin Sheedy, who I think's worth mentioning, in the summer of 82. Yeah. And you only just see a player straight away first game. I think he's a good player. And I think the first 2 home games, the 82-83 season, we beat Villa, who were European champions, 5-0 at Goodison. Yeah. And we beat Spurs, who were obviously the top team at the time, 3-1, 3 days later. And you thought, we're onto something there, you know. Then the next week we got beat at Notts County 1-0. It was sort of... But 82-83 followed a similar pattern. Started off reasonably well. Similar pattern to 81-82. Started reasonably well. Had the horrible periods included like an infamous derby defeat, which we won't talk about.
Yeah, gloss over that.
Yeah. Getting to early 83, we get a bit of a cup run going. Like we beat Arsenal, who'd won the cup the previous 2 years in 81. We beat Spurs, didn't we? Who'd won the cup in the previous two years. And then we go to Old Trafford in March 83, which is still one of my favourite Everton games I've ever attended in terms of atmosphere and the way the team performed and stuff like this. Big occasion. 58,000, 15,000 Everton fans. And we got beat 1-0 in the last minute to me, Frank Stapleton. But you could see then things were... We signed Inchie, hadn't we, the year before. You could see... I know it's easy in retrospect then, but if you see that team, the March 83 team against Man United, you can see things bubbling under. Quite a lot of the things have taken shape. And we finished the season really strongly again, won 5 out of the last 6, including the infamous, the great game of Brighton, which is always worth talking about on Grand National Day, where I think Clive Thomas, obviously infamous, but no match of the day. We're winning 1-0 going to the last minute. Gives them a needless penalty. Jim Arnold saves it. Does what nobody did at the time, orders a retake because Jim Arnold, the Jim Arnold moved, he said. They score to make it 1-1. They're trying to save themselves from relegation. Then disallows one of their goals for no reason at all. And then last kick of the game, we went up the other end, didn't we? Kevin Sheedy scored to win 2-1. And we finished that season really strongly, 82-83. And you're thinking, yeah, we finished, as you say, Phil, finished 7th and signs of progress. So by 83, I think the board probably thought, yeah, we're making progression here. I think Harry Katzek said that he had the best band, band of youngsters in 82-83 that he had since the end of the 60s. The team that won the title in 70. So I think there was a lot of hope at the end of that Howard's first 2 years that we had a good group of players who could take us forward.
Well, he was quite fortunate in some respects as well. I mean, fate works in a strange way, but you think about some of the players that he brought in. Adrian Heath was a huge transfer fee, record transfer fee, 700 grand at the time. But the club was cash strapped. We had problems after that. I mean, Terry Curran came in and famously had this really, sort of extravagant loan spell. But we couldn't afford to sign him permanently. The club, the fans chanting sign him up, and they just couldn't basically afford him. So we had to go scraping around the bargain basement for players. Yeah. Kevin Sheedy was cheap. He was 100 grand from Liverpool. Peter Reid cost 60 grand. So Peter Reid had been a great player for Bolton, but again had dreadful injuries. Arsenal wanted to sign him for 600 grand at the time, and that fell down. But as a result of the various injuries, Everton got him on a bargain, so not near the end of his career. He was 26, 27. But then Andy Gray, was it January 1983 when he arrived? His debut against Nottingham Forest.
Later on, it was October 83 when he arrived, December, January. Go back to your point about being skinned. Yeah. He famously had to change the bank, didn't he? Because the bank wouldn't give him 60 grand for Peter Reid. So they changed the bank to a bank that likes to say yes. I think, to quote one of the adverts at the time, So, so they bought Reid, didn't he? And we tried to sign Reid in the summer of 80. I think Blade was prepared to pay 600 grand for him, which is just mad, when you come to think we got him for 60.
Well, sorry, Phil, go on.
I was just going to say, when we look back at and reminisce about any era, it's always the fascinating thing about players we missed out on. Is there anybody that always stands out from the early 80s that maybe Howard tried to sign but just couldn't get?
Oh gosh, he was a real wheeler dealer, Howard. Obviously Brian Robson's the one that Gavin mentioned earlier. That would have been an astonishing signing, but so that never looked likely. Who's the guy, Paul Maguire? From Shrewsbury.
Shrewsbury, he had on loan, yeah. I think that fell through because he was injured, didn't he? I tell you who Howard was signed by. He's signed by Nicky Reid from Manchester City.
Right, okay, good player.
He really like Nicky Reid from Man City. The other one which will come, we might as well mention it now, about the famous one with Spenno, but I think you were probably working then, was when he tried to sign Nunes, the lad from Brazil, wasn't it?
I'm not so sure they ever did, I think that might have been a little bit of creativity from some of our friends in the national newspapers.
Yeah. So it's always weird. So I think this was around the time, wasn't it, when we were struggling at the start of the 83-84 season, Phil? And I can't even remember Nunes. He was a Brazilian striker, wasn't he? I can't remember the wise and wherefores. I think, didn't Howard say, I think Howard was rumoured, and then I think he subsequently said, I got a bit worried there, he went playing in the middle of the Brazilian summer. He had gloves on, didn't he? And that was one of the more entertaining transfer tales. But as Benno says quite rightly, is we were in team because we brought Andy King to the club back in 1982, one of Benno's favourite players. But that's only because I think Peter Eastoe went the other way, didn't he? Yeah. Peter Eastoe, worth mentioning, he was a very, very fine striker. Yeah. I spoke before about players that they brought in under Howard, when the players he had. Mick Ferguson or Alan Byerly weren't half as good as what Peter Eastoe was, Yeah. And so we were always doing, it was always loans and exchanges, and we only bought Trevor Stephen in the summer of '83 because we basically used the McMahon fee for that, didn't we? 250k or 300 grand we got for McMahon, we used for Trevor Stephen, which is probably pretty good business, I think, for everybody.
It was, although again, Trevor Stephen was an absolute, sort of child at the time. He was, sort of a very, very young footballer. I always remember you talking about expectations and stuff. Was it the start of the 83-84 season where we beat Stoke 1-0 in the opening day? And, there was, like you said, a lot of gallows humour around at the time. And no one ever expected Everton to win anything, so around then. Even their expectation levels, so were high. I always remember, walking away from the ground, having beaten Stoke 1-0 on the opening day, and hearing somebody say, "Oh well, another season we're not going to win the league," and it was like a laugh and a joke. And everybody started laughing and said, "Oh yeah, good one." But we won the FA Cup that year, and that was the catalyst, so to what then followed. So no, it came from nowhere really. No one really expected that to happen.
No.
Well, of course, Brennan. Sorry, Gav. I was going to say because of course. As we end the parameters of this podcast, which is December 31st, 83, I think were we 16th after a 0-0 with Coventry?
Well, that was Coventry. I was there. That is the famous game. I know it was a dreadful experience. We'd beaten them 1-0 in the League Cup earlier. 2-1 in the League Cup earlier. When again there were like about 8,000 there, and I think the gate was round about the same for a New Year's Eve game, and you can hear the players shouting, so that was how sparse it was. And again, talking about apathy, so being almost as bad as toxicity, there was a bit of both that day, because so no one could see any kind of progress. We started the season very, very badly, and if we talk about Gordon Lee, his reign revolving around unsuccessful cup runs, you could argue that Howard's reign was actually kept afloat on 2 cup runs. The League Cup run that kept us going. Coventry were 1-0 down with about 10 minutes to go, came back and won 2-1, and then ended up got through the famous back pass at Oxford and all that. So ended up going to Wembley in that competition, and that just seems to breed a little bit of confidence, which we then took into the FA Cup. Similar kind of run there, ended up winning the cup, and so and ended that season very, very well. But so Howard's reign was really kept buoyant, I suppose, by 2 cup runs that started around about then.
It was, wasn't it? It was that we really, so we couldn't score goals. I think the first 21 league games, I think we scored 11 goals, but there was even patches within that. We won 1-0 at Man United, who were top in the December. So there's some good performances on occasions, but the pivotal week, wasn't it? Which was the first week of November '83, where we played Liverpool live on the Sunday on ITV, and we got 3-0, got beat 3-0, and I always remember, like, one of the low points of being an Everton fan, I was on the car, I'm walking down this back entry, Anfield, and there's 2 lads who were about 8 playing football, giving me loads of stick, I just thought, like, being an Everton fan, I can't get worse than this. And of course, what happened then is Colin was promoted, wasn't he, from reserve team coach to first team coach, I think, on the Wednesday. And I think we played Coventry on the same day at Goodison. 1-2-1. The pivotal thing within that, which is probably a bit more significant than the team at the time, was Peter Reid hadn't played. Peter Reid hadn't played on the Sunday, and there's the famous story, isn't it? And it's not. This is true because I heard it. Ian St John used to have that radio show, didn't he? Ian St John's World of Soccer on Radio City, and somebody phoned up after the derby and said, "Why isn't Peter Reid getting a game for Everton?" And there's going on. I think St John, because he was quite savvy, he'd been working in telly for radio for a while, realised there was something going on and said, "Who's this? Who's this?" Oh, he goes, "Oh, it's Sean Reid for piece of sport." And of course, Reedy came on the sub against Coventry, turned the game, and then just stayed in the team. And then, of course, on the Thursday, it was Andy Gray signed, didn't he? Which, of course, the Echo got wind of, didn't he? Famously.
Well, it was. Ken Rodgers was the Everton writer at the time, and somebody rang the office, and it used to happen quite a bit. I remember somebody ringing once and saying, "I've just seen George Weir at Lime Street," and so quite often you would check these out. But yeah, it was a genuine phone call, and it said, "I've just seen Andy Gray outside Goodison Park. Are we signing him?" And Ken's like, "Well, I'll make inquiries." So he rang Jim Greenwood, who was the club secretary at the time, and says, "Jim, so I've just had a tip that you might be trying to sign, Andy Gray." And I think in it, Jim goes quiet, and he just says, "Might need to bring me back in an hour or so, Ken." Whoa! So he did. He got things ready, and he got the exclusive that day. But yeah,
wasn't it the fella who had the sweet shop, didn't he, by Goodison, and Andy Gray came in, didn't he, to buy a newspaper? I think he was the one who phoned. He was one who phoned Ken up. It was just legends itself. So that was the Thursday, and I think Howard being Howard, he could, if he made the deal permanent on the Thursday, he couldn't play on the Saturday. So we actually signed him on loan for a day, didn't we?
Yeah.
So he could play on the one of Wayne's rules. We signed him on the Thursday on loan, so we could play on the Saturday. Then made it permanent. That was a great tale.
Was that Nottingham Forest though?
Yeah.
Because he was influential that day as well. I mean, he never scored, but he created the goal. I think was it for Adrian Heath or
Yeah.
And he was such an inspired signing. I know, people treat him as a bit of a Marmite character nowadays, but Andy Gray will always be a footballing hero for me for what he was, to that Everton team at that era. He was only there for 18 months, but the influence he exerted on that team was massive in terms of his quality as a footballer. He's a player who cost £1.5 million only a couple of years previously. He'd been the PFA Player of the Year, the Young Player of the Year. He was an absolute top-class centre-forward, ravaged by injuries. But more than that, it was his force of personality. You look at all the goals Everton scored during the glory era, and you look at who's first there celebrating with the goal scorer. Every time it's Andy Gray. He was such an infectious personality. He looked off on Graham Sharp and taught Graham Sharp an awful lot about good centre-forward play. But he just gave that squad confidence. Lots and lots of significant signings. You couldn't say that he was more influential than Peter Reid or Kevin Sheedy or Trevor Stephen. But, in terms of his personality, he was a proper leader. And he did make a massive difference to that team. And I love that man as a result of what he did then.
Yeah, but by December '83, we're not really feeling that, are we? Because the Coventry game, we played Sunderland on Boxing Day, and that was a desperate 0-0 draw as well. The significance about '83-'84 as well. If you have a look at it before Christmas, as you say, what did you say, Phil? We were 16th, were we?
16th, I believe. Yeah.
I think we'd only conceded 21 goals in 21 league games. So Howard had got the defence right. The team's problem was scoring goals. So as soon as the team started scoring goals, you knew, it's easy to look back on now, but that's when we would start winning games, Yeah. But it was that. I mean, you didn't think that 31st of December. I mean, there was a couple of days later. I remember coming back, and the radio was almost it. And I remember the story was Mike England was going to be manager, wasn't it? There was a leak to the press and radio, wasn't it? That Mike England, who was the then Wales manager, was going to be the next Everton boss, and I don't think Howard was too happy about that, was he? Whether it was Sue or not is a different story.
Well, it's not so much Howard. I think the board were unhappy as well. I mean, so Philip Carter came out, because the press basically, quite rightly, thought that Howard was under pressure. I mean, I remember that era very, very well. I mean, Howard lived just around the corner from where I am now, and the bottom of his road had graffiti daubed on the nameplate, and his garage doors had graffiti daubed on them. So a Kendall House, and he stayed very, very brave and dignified throughout all that. But the press making inquiries of Philip Carter, and Philip Carter gave him, the dreaded vote of confidence. And when it was taken the way all votes of confidences were at the time, saying, "Oh, that's it, then he must be on his way," he got very angry and said, "No, I mean it. So I mean it. So we're fully behind Howard Kendall. We know what he's trying to do," and he was genuine in his support for him, and that support was justified. Very, very soon afterwards.
To be fair to Sir Philip, or Philip as it was at the time, he went in Prince in the Daily Express, didn't he?
Yeah.
And he did a piece for the Daily Express where he said about Howard and how the board were backing him, which took a lot of bottle. Especially because it was a little bit toxic at Goodison at the time for the 13,000s would go most weeks,
It was. I mean, I was working for the Formby Times at the time, and I remember my editor asking me to go round to Howard's house and do a piece, with his then wife Cynthia, basically asking about her wife as a football widow, basically, how she never sees him, and so what's life like, at home there. Lovely lady. But she was telling me about that era and saying that, it was very, very hard for him. He used to have to go in the morning and, feeling down, feeling, really low, and steel himself before he drove over the threshold at Belfield and basically force a smile on his face. Typically, he was a very cheery character, Howard. He was very, very affable.
Yeah, great.
But he must have been feeling the pressure so much then. And he actually physically had to make himself feel upbeat and buoyant, just so, his mood didn't, transmit to the players around the training ground at the time.
Yeah. It was interesting, we'll probably talk about this in the next podcast, is I think he still had the scars of that for many years afterwards. I don't think he forgot about that period. I think it took many years for that period to sort of get over it. I think even in the glory days, I think he always remembered that period. And I think it took, if you think about the abuse he got and all that, he said he couldn't play, if he played charity matches, he'd always play centre mid, wouldn't he? Because if he went that bad, the touchline, he'd get a load of stick, And I think he didn't forget that even during the glory years. I think there was still like that little bit of edginess about that period with him.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Well, that's been great, chaps. Really enjoyed that. Hopefully, for everybody listening, that's been some lovely insight and anecdotes and colour about perhaps a period of the 80s in Everton's history that perhaps doesn't get talked about very often, but for good reason, no doubt, as you've explained here. So, as said at the top of the podcast, the idea is that the second podcast in this two-parter that we will record next week will look at the teams that followed the great Everton team. Of course, we've talked about how that got built today, and we will talk about the teams that followed or tried to follow and emulate the great team, sort of 84 through 87. But Gav, Preno, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that, and hopefully everybody listening has enjoyed that too, and allowed some reminiscing in a strange time, and hopefully some new anecdotes and new information.